This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, ideas, and interviews from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, how to sell an idea. So why this one? Well, one of the primary responsibilities of a media salesperson is to bring fresh, creative thinking to our clients and our agency partners. Theoretically, a media solution that is underpinned by a great creative idea will actually generate a stronger outcome for the advertiser and will therefore help the media salesperson create a much stronger value proposition as well. Although we can all identify or recognize a good idea when we see one, the ability to actually sell a creative idea to an advertiser is its own unique skill set. It takes time, it takes patience to master it. Many great ideas. In my career, over 11 years in media sales, many great ideas have been left unrealized due to a disconnect in the way that they are actually sold into an advertiser. Our guest today is Wade Kingsley, founder and CEO of The Ideas Business. Now, Wade founded The Ideas Business with the core purpose of wanting to create more creators. His belief, which I share, is that creativity is not the domain of a few creative people that were born gifted to be able to come up with ideas, but it's actually a skill set that everybody has inherently inside them. The key is actually how to unlock creative potential for individuals and for team success. Wade's passion for the creative process, combined with 25 years' experience across media, marketing, branding, sales, delivers a really unique skill set that you can tap into to grow your creative competency. Now, I actually saw Wade deliver an amazing keynote last year at a conference, an industry conference. I can't think of anyone better to speak on this topic, so we're very lucky to have him, and this is going to be a great episode.
The first five.
Wade, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Mate, great to have you here, and thanks for making the time. Before we actually jump into the main topic, obviously I know who you are. I'd love for you to share with the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and what prompted you to actually found The Ideas Business.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity because I do love talking about ideas, so it's something you don't have to ask twice, that's for sure. Well, my background is media and marketing and has been pretty much since I was, believe it or not, 10, because I started a radio station at school when I was 10. Went to school in Adelaide and was always fascinated by radio. I was always interested, and I felt like the people who were on the radio were kind of making it up as they went along. They were kind of creating ideas on the spot, and there was something about that I liked. I knew media was for me, but radio in particular is where I started, and I was absolutely the luckiest guy on earth because I got my first radio job in my hometown of Adelaide. I didn't have to do the country kind of journey that a lot of people in radio have to do. Also realised I probably didn't have the great radio voice and probably not as essential these days, but it still was back then. And I really liked the idea of helping people behind the scenes. So I was a show producer and then went into programming, and I was lucky enough to join. The first station was 5AA, a talk station in Adelaide. And it was just taken over by DMG, which went on to start the Nova network. So I was absolutely right place, right time. Very lucky to kickstart my career. And by the age of 25, I was a programmer in regional markets across Australia. I worked in Townsville, Albury, Sunshine Coast, and then started at Nova Brisbane as the promotions and marketing director, which is actually probably where I got my interest in sales. I was never one of those radio programmers that kind of hated sales and avoided sales. I was always interested in using ideas to be able to generate money for the business. That's what we were there to do, have fun doing it, but to get ratings and get revenue. So I was always interested in helping the sales guys out. And interestingly enough, my sort of 15 years in total at Nova, half were on the programming side and half were on the sales side. So I got a reasonable taste, I think, for both. And then when I eventually left Nova, I actually went to a media agency in Melbourne called Visium. And that's when some dots started to join in my head about creativity, commercial creativity, selling ideas, how ideas can really, convince consumers to do things. And then by the time I got into Southern Cross Austereo in 2015, I think I was a bit more well-rounded. I kind of understood more from the content background and the radio side, but I also understood what brands were trying to achieve by using radio and using the media. And that kind of helped me kind of get into starting my own business, which I did in 2017.
That's awesome. I didn't know you were an Adelaide boy. I actually lived in Adelaide for a couple of years working as a sales director down there. And it really is like, for the radio industry, it's like the heartbeat of Australian radio. I didn't realise a couple of major networks started down there, a whole bunch of talent are from there, a whole bunch of people that are sort of now in very high-profile media gigs, all either did a tour of duty or came from there. So there you go.
Absolutely. I think Adelaide's sort of one of those cities too that it's big enough and small enough. You know, you're not in the cutthroat world of Sydney, Melbourne, even Brisbane these days, but, you know, there's enough. It's a metro market, but there's enough room to experiment. There's enough room to enjoy. And Adelaide's had a great radio heritage. You know, there's been great radio stations like SAFM back in the day, and obviously Paul Thompson starting Austereo and basing it in Adelaide, and then the same with DMG Nova was, you know, started and based in Adelaide. So we're very fortunate that Paul was a fan of living in Adelaide. That benefited a lot of people's careers.
Well, it brings us to sort of the topic today of creativity and how to sell an idea. And I used to love, all the people from Adelaide would say this famous, if it works in Adelaide, it'll work anywhere, was the expression they used.
That's right.
So, you know, the context of a creative idea, and I've spent a bit of time trying to put some definition around it because it can be very broad to go to a sales team or to a media sales team and go, you need to be more creative. But to me, I reckon it's landed pretty well with this idea of finding a solution to a problem that is functional and novel. From your perspective, I guess having a fairly broad experience working, you know, publisher, working sales, working agency, working in creative departments, I just would love to know what your definition of a creative ideas are in the media and the media sales space.
Well, it's absolutely true to say, you know, you could ask 100 people and you'd probably get 100 different answers around how to define an idea. And look, there's no right or wrong answer. I think it's more about interpretation. And look, creativity and ideas are absolutely about interpretation, because what I think is a great idea, you might think is a terrible idea, and vice versa. And part of that's what makes it interesting, I think. But for me, the definition of an idea in the media space really is a solution within a campaign structure. You know, it's a solution to a problem that the business is having, a problem that the brand is having, and you need to convince a consumer to think, feel, or do something, take some sort of action, and a campaign idea or a campaign solution delivers on that. And, you know, look, I think one of the things I think about ideas in the media space is we probably don't give it the emphasis that it deserves. We kind of lean on the inventory of advertising a little heavily. I mean, you know, everyone pretty much gets that advertising, you know, is a form of communication. Everyone gets that there's inventory such as 30-second radio spots, 30-second TV spots, digital placement, etc. And so I think when you kind of then thinking about defining an idea, I like what you've said about that sort of functional and novel. It has to be functional in the sense that the idea is going to solve a problem for the business, and novel in the sense that it's presenting itself as a different interpretation or a different way of communicating a reason for that consumer to take action to help the business solve the problem.
I love it. Well, look, that's an awesome setup for the main topic. So let's jump in now.
Media sales mastery.
Selling an idea. Now, obviously, you know, there's more stakeholders involved in getting an idea up than just the end user, the advertiser we're selling to. So let's maybe look at it broadly. But what, in your experience and your observation, what are some of the most common barriers to effectively selling an idea or conveying a concept to somebody to get buy-in and understanding?
Well, I think one of the first barriers, and we sort of do a bit of this work in our business, in our training sessions, is when you think about what an idea actually is, if you're selling it, if you're sitting in front of someone and saying, right, I've got an idea, or we've got an idea, or this is how we're going to solve the problem, what you have to kind of accept in that dynamic is an idea really is a transferal of belief. You believe something. You're sitting there going, okay, well, we've been given the brief, we understand the challenge, or we understand the strategy, and this is what we believe will solve the problem. This idea will solve that problem, or this campaign solution will solve the problem. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to transfer the belief that you have in that idea to the person who has to make the decision, whether that be the agency or the client. You're the one who has to go, we believe it, we want you to believe it too. And what I tend to find is a barrier to doing that effectively is when you're selling rationally, it's very easy for people to argue ration against rationale. You know, if you've got a campaign schedule, if you've got an advertising schedule, you kind of got the amount of spots, you kind of know the reach, the frequency, all that kind of stuff. they're kind of numbers that you can argue against. But what is harder to argue against if you're selling an idea is the emotion. If you're pitching to someone rationally, they can kind of defend it. If you're pitching to someone emotionally and you're making them feel something with your idea, that's always a good place to start. And some of the sort of the techniques we do in our story selling workshops is talk about how to sell emotionally. You're appealing. At the end of the day, most of us are selling to a human, right? You've got an idea. You're trying to get someone else with a heartbeat who's breathing oxygen to go along with it. And so what you need to do is remember that you are a human. You've got emotions, and you're trying to transfer the belief of that idea to someone else. So you appeal to them emotionally. You've got to try and stagger the pitch in a way that appeals to their emotional side before their rational side. You've got to use words and language that bring to life the idea in an emotional sense. And remember, emotion can mean feeling anything. It doesn't have to be just overjoyed. It could be, that idea really makes me laugh, that makes me cry, that makes me angry, whatever. But you've just got to find a way to position the idea in an emotional sense and try and transfer that belief. Because a barrier that I've often seen, and I've certainly been in pitches in agencies and with clients where you can tell straight away they're not getting it, is it's when most of the time I find the salesperson is starting too rationally and doesn't put across that confidence that they believe the solution's going to work. They're kind of responding to the brief, if you like, rather than responding with a solution to the brief. And you can usually tell the difference, I reckon.
I would completely agree. And I think the ability to kind of fall back on the assets that you're using and talk about the rational reason as to why you're drawing them in, it can become very, very messy very quickly in that sense. That's a really good way of putting it around sort of that emotive language and whatnot. And I suppose what I'm curious is to kind of jump back a step here and go, before we're even at the stage of selling an idea and really thinking about how we can passionately kind of convey what it is, let's talk about the starting point, the brief. How do we actually define the parameters for our creativity and mitigate the risk of just completely missing the mark at the point of pitching the idea?
Well, it's interesting because the most of the time that I spent in media, as I said, was at Nova. And even though I did work a lot on the sales side and was in market with the sales team and started a division there which is still going today, called Create, which is kind of like their campaign solutions team. It wasn't really until I started working agency side that I understood where I'd gone wrong for 10 years, if that makes sense. And what I noticed when I was on the agency side is I could tell with 99% accuracy when a publisher was coming back into the agency to pitch an idea or even just get the brief, even at the first stages. I could tell who was going to win it. You could just tell before they'd even given you their solution or given you their rates or anything. You just had a feeling that who came to the brief, for starters, was critical. If it was only a salesperson, you were relying on that salesperson to deliver that information accurately back to the rest of the business, because everyone knows it's not just the salesperson that creates the solution. There's a team, there's content teams, or there's editorial, or there's other parts of the business that have to get involved to get something back to you as an agency. So I always felt like, if they're only bringing one person to the brief and it's a salesperson, there's a chance they might miss some information. And that's not to say that the salesperson couldn't do that effectively, but more heads, more ability to ask those questions, more people who would ask more lateral thinking questions in a briefing environment was pretty critical. And I think what happens is I tend to find you win or lose a pitch in the brief. If you've got the right people getting it, when it comes back into the business and you're working on a solution that you've got the right heads around the table, if you're just following the same process every time, you can't really expect different solutions. You've got to assemble a team that sort of fits the brief, if you like. So, okay, well, I want to get that guy because he's worked on, the auto category before, or this guy, used to work at that agency that had that client. So that person will give us some culture around the agency and how they make decisions, or whatever that might be. You just kind of want to assemble a fit-for-purpose team. And I think that when you've got the brief, sometimes it's not the information that's in the brief, because usually that's pretty stock standard, demo, budget, KPIs, all the things that are pretty much in every brief, particularly from an agency. It's about how you take it and how you start to work on it when when you get back into the creative space, back in your business.
Such a good point, Wade, because I think one of the things, we talk about is like casting the brainstorm. And I've always wondered whether actually it really should be casting the briefing session, because there are people there that are going to be observers, people there that are just going to summarize differently. And to your point, the ability to ask really provocative questions from a lateral thinking standpoint, you can almost differentiate your solution based on the fact that you've uncovered completely different information from your competitors. So
that's right.
It's it's a really good, I guess it kind of naturally flows into the next question I had, which is not only the fact that there's a lot of stakeholders in generating an idea, but there's just a lot of different people. We talk about the briefing, the strategic process, arriving at the insight, coming up with the concept itself, talking about how we would implement or bring it to life, linking it back to the objectives. Like, there's a lot involved in the process, and I can see why a lot of media salespeople will go back to the rationalization and talk about why we've driven this reach and frequency or delivered these kind of audience numbers, because it's a little bit overwhelming to go, where do I actually start? And where am I maybe undercooking things? I'm curious to know if there is a best practice kind of framework for how you might cover all of these off, or is every case truly unique? Is it really about tailoring it to the exact audience you're presenting to?
Well, I think framework's a good way to describe it, Jamie, because I think there probably is a best practice framework. A framework meaning there's some sort of, literally a frame that you can interpret in different ways. It's not like a set process where, okay, every time we get a brief, it has to go step 1, step 2, step 3. A framework gives you that sort of flexibility. And to me, I kind of think of those sort of processes in stages. What stage are we going to do first? What stage are we going to do next? And what stage are we going to sort of finish up with? As I said, back to the sort of the briefing thing, I think, yes, absolutely, cast the briefing. I used to attend briefings with, like an account manager and a sales manager, and we would all ask different questions. And that's great, because the account manager might ask questions that, sit within his or her area of expertise. The sales manager might be asking more broader picture questions around the category or other clients. And I would be saying things like, so with this client, why is their logo blue? And you look at it and you kind of go, well, it's got nothing to do with the response. But for me, in a creative mindset, it does, because there may be some advantage I've got over a competitor who's also taking the brief. It's one of the things we kind of work on is asking what we call the next 10 questions. The first 10 questions are going to be the question that every salesperson to every client's going to ask. What's your demo? What's your budget? What's the campaign timing? Blah, 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 blah. And they're all important pieces of information. But the next 10 questions are where you can be really unique, and you could pick up a piece of information that the agency or the client is going to go, oh, gee, I hadn't actually thought about that, or, that's a good question. And then you've got a piece of unique information that when you're creating your solution could provide the difference, because you've taken the time to ask the right question at the start. And so that's kind of probably stage 1. Stage 2 is then when you're working on the solution development. Again, putting together that team, getting the right expertise in the room. I often find this is the best time to bring in editorial or programming, because what tends to happen, from my radio experience, the programming guys hate this, is when they're pretty much boxed into, they haven't been in the room when the solution's been developed. They just kind of have to be that last kind of checkpoint to go, look, we want to present this idea to Coke. Can you say yes or no? And, gun to the head style never works, I find, with editorial programming people. They need to have some early buy-in, which means getting involved in the solution creation. So that kind of casting that area. And then I think the third stage is actually structuring the pitch. And the pitch becomes quite critical in how it's delivered. And one of the great frameworks that we had at Southern Cross Austereo, actually, when we created the studio, which is their campaign solutions team, we had a great group of people. They're really smart people who put together a framework that we called CASE. And CASE, C-A-S-E, CASE stood for Challenge, Approach, Solution, Execution. And what we would do is we would go to market and say, okay, the challenge, this is the challenge you asked us to do. You asked us, McDonald's, to help launch this new burger. That was the challenge. Our approach to doing that was to use our A-grade talent who can become endorsers of this new burger through personal experience. Our solution is this campaign idea called, Tommy Little loves Big Macs, whatever. And our execution is, live reads and in-store appearances and whatever. And so to map that out as the challenge first, then the approach, then the solution execution, the key step I found made a huge difference was that approach. Because if you go straight from here was the brief and here's our idea, what you're not really allowing the client or the agency to do is buy in enough. That they might buy into your approach. So they go, okay, great. So your idea to help sell this new burger is using talent. Great, we like that idea. If you then cut to the solution and they don't like Tommy Little for some reason, or Tommy's not available because he's just done a deal with Hungry Jack's that you didn't know about, because of course those things always happen, is that you've got the approach that stands true. Okay, using talent is still the right approach to deliver on the challenge, but the solution and execution can change. The timing can change and the kind of solution. So that's kind of the best sort of pitching framework that I think I was involved in developing at SCA, was this kind of case mentality. It's like put the best case forward, challenge, approach, solution, execution.
I really like that. I mean, what I like about it too is that you're not just talking about reverse engineering the way you pitch an idea in. It's actually embedded into the process that you arrive at the idea in terms of how you actually generate it. And I think that's often where we probably come a bit unstuck sometimes is, and this is across all media. I mean, the one consistent thing that comes back from a lot of media salespeople is the assets we're selling across are getting more diverse, more complex. We're expected to know more. We're expected to sell across more probably areas than ever before. And therefore, there's this real complexity that starts to come into how we build these campaign schedules. And oftentimes, I think a lot of media salespeople get quite, concerned about not relaying that level of detail when they're actually pitching a solution and going, hey, look, we're using this, we're using this, we're using this. So bring it back to something simple like that and something really tangible. I would imagine from your experience that almost gives the client or the agency that's buying the idea, it gives them assurance that the thinking's already been done, but we don't need to go into the minutiae here. We just need to talk about those 4 big pillars to actually how we've arrived at this solution. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% correct. And I think what that also acknowledges is, if I've sat in 10,000 briefs and 10,000 pitches over my time in media, I can't think of one time where the solution that you pitched ends up actually being executed 100% the same way, because things change. Things always change along the way. So the client moves the timing of the campaign, which affects this sort of change, or an ambassador you thought was good to go is now not good to go, or the objectives of the client have changed. Oh, whoops, we thought we were selling Big Macs. We now need to sell fillet of fish. So, and so what you, and I'm getting hungry saying that. And so what you need to do is you need to have acknowledged that there will be, from the point of pitch to the point of actual campaign execution and completion, it will be different in some way. And what having a sort of a framework does is allows you to keep the integrity of the approach to how you're going about solving that problem for the client. And you've got the integrity of the solution, but the execution might vary. You might the budget might get cut, or in Corona times things change on a daily basis. So you don't want to get locked in, and the lock in is sometimes where you then get that tension back with the client to the publisher around, you sold it this way and it's changed. Well, yeah, that's because things do change. Like acknowledge it, and find a way to have a flexible idea. Don't get stuck in. Oh, but you said there'd be a digital placement that went live at 8:59 a.m. on Monday the 13th. Well, things change.
Things are ever changing. To me, that's why this over-reliance on inventory and deployment and implementation in the cell can be real. You can really come unstuck if that's what you're leading with, because then suddenly that's your currency you're trading on, is your ability to execute at 8:59 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. I think it probably leads into the last question on this topic, mate, which is all around the idea generation process. And obviously the people who listen to this podcast sell across all different media. We've even got people from different parts of the world, which is amazing. But they all consistently raise this one, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. They go, we're in the room. Okay, we get that we don't want to lead with product or platform first. We need to come up with an idea. Maybe we've got a great headline on a whiteboard that everyone's high-fiving and laughing in the room and thinking it's great, but nobody's actually thought about how we bring it to life or implement or execute the idea. Have you got any sort of tools the guys could use to properly kind of blow out or expand an idea from a headline on a whiteboard to something more campaignable?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is just, my 20-something years of experience, I think, plenty of times I've done it the wrong way and it hasn't worked. And hopefully, like everything you do for a long time, you kind of work out what flies and what doesn't. A couple of principles I think I would take out. One is I tend to find that sometimes people are really, really keen just to sell what the result is. So the result being, you asked us, this is the challenge you asked us to come up with. Here's the idea. Let's go. And what they miss is the opportunity to sell the story of how the idea was created. And if you're sitting down and you're going, right, we're gonna go in tomorrow, we're gonna see the guys from McDonald's and we're gonna tell them about this idea. Don't just go straight to, here's the idea. What you want to do is go, okay, we saw you a couple of weeks ago. Here's the brief you gave us. This is the kind of the challenge. And this is how we went about solving that problem in our business. We first spoke to, the content team. We asked some ideas and we had this idea and that idea. We didn't go with those, but this is the kind of the one we've landed on and here's why. We then spoke to the insights team to get some data and that's kind of, married up to where we were going creatively. We then put together a great platform to amplify that idea across these pieces of imagery, etc. Take people on the journey with you. Don't just feel like you have to go straight in. And even if I've seen this work really effectively, even if you've only got 20 minutes to pitch, you can still take a minute to say, from the last time we saw you, this is what's happened. This is what we've been doing in our business. One, it actually demonstrates the level of effort and care that it takes to put together an idea or a media solution, because it takes a heap of effort. And sometimes it's actually pretty good to acknowledge that everyone's worked really hard to get to this point. Another thing is, it gives people that emotional buy-in. They're less likely to say no on a storytelling aspect than if you just subjectively go, well, this is their idea. They're going to go, well, we like it or we don't. But you're gonna bring them along the journey with you. It's really, really critical. So I often tell people just to sell the journey. The other thing is, that notion of having it from a headline on a whiteboard to a full campaign. You've got to actually sell the campaign as a journey as well. So rather than just, here's our idea and here's how it's going to roll, you introduce some of the storytelling language. Think of it in that framework of, once upon a time, this happened and then this happened and as a result that happened and happily ever after. You want to start with, here's how we're going to launch the campaign. Here's where the idea starts. Here's where we get into phase 1 of the idea and when it starts to go. Here's phase 2, and this is what changes and why. And we're going to round it out with phase 3, and this is why we think that's most effective. And then combined all of those pieces together is the campaign solution. It's really about story selling. It really is. It's not just the idea you're selling, it's the journey that they're going on to get that idea up. And I think one of my favourite stories about pitching ideas, which I'll share, is one that I read ages ago in a great book called Made to Stick, which is still my favourite book on ideas I think I've ever read. It's by a couple of American guys called Chip and Dan Heath. And Made to Stick is just one of those books about why some ideas work and some don't. And they give this great story about the producers of the movie Speed, the Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves movie. From I think late 80s, early 90s. And
92, I think. 92. 94 it was.
Okay. Well, when
I'm showing off my nerdiness here. Sorry, continue. It's not relevant, really.
No, that's okay. And the way the producers pitch that movie to Speed is kind of like the gold medal of pitches. So what happens is, for the Hollywood studio system, for those that don't know, is producers or production companies come up with a concept and they need someone to pay for it. So they go into a studio and they say, right, studio, we've got this idea for a movie, we want you to fund it. And so the producers of Speed walk into the studio and say, right, we've got this idea for a movie. And the studio goes, great, what's it called? And they said, well, it's Speed. Okay. And what's it about? And the producers said 5 words. And the 5 words got them $30 million at the time to make the movie. And the 5 words were Die Hard on a Bus, which I just thought was brilliant because they've summed up the movie in 5 words and they've pitched it correctly. They've basically said to the people, this is like Die Hard, which obviously was a huge box office hit at the time. It's like something but here's the thing that's novel. Here's the thing that's it's different. And you had said at the start that functional and novel. That's exactly what Die Hard on a Bus is. Functional, as in Die Hard, box office smash, you know what that movie's about, big action, baddies, whatever. But the novel part is we're going to put it on a bus. And they didn't have to say any more. They didn't have to go into the 55 miles an hour and Dennis Hopper and the bus blows up. Of course, that's all a great part of the story, but the pitch itself was something that they went, wow, we love that. They sold to them emotionally. They got them bought in right from the get-go. And I think that, when you're pitching an idea, if you cannot sum it up in a sentence, I mean, 5-word is pretty bloody good, but if you can't sum it up in one sentence, then you really need to work harder at pitching it, because whoever you're pitching it to has to go and tell other people. If it's the agency, they have to go and tell the client. And that client then has to go and tell 5 other people that work in the business, and that person has to go to the CEO and the head of legal and whatever. You want to give them that die hard on a bus so they can actually go, you know what? We love that idea that you guys presented, and we remember it's called this and it does that. That's if you can't do it that succinctly, you've got to work harder at making it succinct and making it as sellable as that.
That's awesome. There's literally a whole industry in Hollywood, and I'm sure the job title is called logline writer, and that is literally all they do.
Yeah.
They find a way to take a script and write a quick pitch. I think the one that I heard that I loved was they got approval on Talladega Nights by walking in and doing the same thing. They said it was Will Ferrell as a NASCAR driver, and it was literally the check got written in the room, and off they went to write the script.
But that's how simple you can see it, and let's not be, movie snobs here. The movies like Sharknado have got made because someone went in and said, let's put sharks in a tornado. But as stupid as that sounds, it's so clear. It's clear what the idea is. It's clear, like snakes on a plane. It's clear what the movie's about. It's clear what the idea is. And you've got to work really, really hard. And that's where you've got to spend a lot of that sort of creative energy before you pitch an idea back, is you've got to try and go, right, and this applies equally from publisher to agency as it does from agency to client and from a marketer to a CEO. You need to be able to deliver that pitch really succinctly, really easily, and really memorably. And I equate it to like the hook of a great song. You might not have heard Easy Lover by Phil Collins for 15 years, right? But you hear it on the radio and you can remember every lyric and you think, why can't I do that? It's because the hook is so good that it unpicks the rest of the story. It unpicks the rest of the song because you've remembered the hook. The hook is catchy, the hook that drives it. And with pitching ideas or selling ideas, you need to write a killer hook. The killer hook will absolutely sell the idea for you. You need to spend way more time getting that hook right and let the execution and the platforms and the inventory come later. Because if they've bought the hook, they'll buy the song.
Wow, there's a great parallel. Pop songwriting and idea generation.
Absolutely.
I love it, mate.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
So we're going to do a first. We're all about innovation here. Here's an idea for you, Wade. Instead of doing one, I can't ask my sales manager that questions, I've got 2 for you.
Wow, so double.
Love it. We're all about pushing the boundaries here. This one, look, both of these I really like and wanted to save for you specifically because they're not really actually... They're more internally focused than anything, which I think is an important part of the creative process and the pitching process. And you've mentioned it even earlier, like how critical it is to get buy-in early from the right stakeholders. So this person, they're a digital account manager. And the question is this: I sell digital media into large agencies and key clients. We have a lot of demand for native content, client editorial, short-form video content. But one thing that is infuriating, which my manager also seems to be struggling with, is presenting our concepts to a room of people who don't seem to be on the same page. If we present to a room of 5 people, for example, chances are that 3 will love it and 2 will be completely offside. We end up having to defend our concepts, or we get a rebrief or a watered-down version of the original idea. Can you set up the proposal or the room in a way that avoids death by committee? What a great phrase at the end there, death by committee of an idea.
Committees kill a lot of things, and ideas are definitely one of the things they kill off. Look, I think that, obviously the hard part about creativity, as we said earlier, is it is subjective, right? An idea you can put a lot of rigor behind, you can put data behind, you can put a lot of merit behind. But the reality is you give it to 100 people and 50 might like it and 50 don't, and who's right and who's wrong. And it's such a subjective thing, as any art is. Its beauty is in its subjectivity. So you kind of have to not fight the system in a little bit of a way. But for this, to answer this question, I think you've got to get practical. And the practicality of, if you've got a lot of people in the room, is you have to start with a place. And this is kind of what I would call sort of negotiation training, because you kind of also forget that, earlier when I said that transfer of belief, you're trying to negotiate with someone. You're trying to say, I believe it. I want to negotiate so you agree with me. The negotiation kind of technique that I would use in pitching an idea is you have to start with the least subjective thing before you get to the most subjective thing. So let's say you come in and say to me, I've got this idea, Wade. It's called Media Sales Mastery Podcast. It's a podcast where everyone recording it is naked. Right. So I would go, okay, well, I don't know how comfortable I feel about being naked, because that's the thing I've remembered you saying, as opposed to the idea of the podcast, because the emotional attachment to being naked outweighs the rational attachment to the benefit of the podcast. So I wouldn't go in and pitch the naked bit up front, because there's a chance that in this example, room of 5 people, 3 will think it's a good idea and 2 won't. What you want to be able to do is leave that detail until after you've got some agreement on the concept to start with. So if you're pitching to 5 people and you say, we've got an idea for a podcast, that's the first place to start. And good thing is, podcast equals good equals growth in 2020. So you'd think that 5 out of 5 would go, okay, podcast, good, we like that. That's trending. There's audience moving to podcasts. Let's go with that. The next thing you'd bring in, okay, it's about media sales. Okay, good. Yep, that's got a 5 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5 in the room. The next thing you do is go, well, it's about sales mastery. So you're sort of stepping it out. And then you leave the bit about everyone being naked to the end, because again, like we were saying before, if I disagree with the naked bit, or I don't like that, but I've bought into 80% of what you've told me, we can change to 20%. If there's split in the room and 3 people don't like the naked bit and 2 people do, then you might go, listen, unless we can all agree, let's leave the naked bit aside. But the Media Sales Mastery Podcast, that idea stands, and you've got it across the line. And I think what tends to happen is when you've got these kind of death by committee on creativity, it's because you're giving them too much. You're basically serving up the whole main course for them to decide which parts of the meal they like or don't. You've got to put little things on the plate that they like. You're the most sure they'll like meat, right? Good. You're the next most sure they'll like potatoes, good, but you're going to leave the Brussels sprouts to the end because they're the most subjective. That's the bit that people are going to go, well, I'm not sure about that. But at the end of the day, you might not get the Brussels sprouts over the line, but the meat and potatoes of the pitch have been maintained, because it's unlikely you're going to get 100% of people agreeing, but what you want to get is 100% of the people agreeing with 80% of what you pitch. That's kind of got to be the aim. And so I'd say to that person who sent in the question, don't give up on the fact that, yes, it is always going to be a struggle, but don't give up on the fact that you're going to get everyone to agree. You probably won't, but you want them to agree with the majority of what you're pitching. So order your brief, order your pitch, put it in a structure where you're getting people to agree up front with things that are universally agreed to. And classic negotiation technique is, you can say, okay, Jamie, what year are we in? 2020. Yep, I agree with that. The day of the week is Wednesday. Yep, I agree with that. The color of the sky is blue. Yep, I agree with that. But I'm going to wear pants today. And you go, well, I'm going to wear shorts. But we've agreed on 75%. And that's what you want to start with.
I love that. I mean, very similar to negotiation. Leave your contentious points to the end and figure out the things that are easily agreed to.
Yeah.
Next question, Wade, comes from Jono. Jono said he's a friend of the show. Thanks, Jono.
Oh, good.
Good on you, mate.
Hi, Jono.
So here we go. This one I like. He starts with, selling ideas to clients isn't necessarily the hard part right now. Where I'm struggling is selling ideas that clients come up with back to content or editorial. Oh, God.
Yes.
I'm getting heart palpitations here in this one. I have a lot of clients who know what kind of promotional ideas they want us to run. And usually they'll give us an ultimatum. If you're willing to do this concept, we'll make an investment with you. I feel like this is just COVID. COVID is really amping this up too.
Absolutely.
Is there any advice Wade has, because he knew you were on the show, is there any advice Wade has for selling the ideas we generate at a client meeting back to people in the business in a way that gets their buy-in?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Jono, is this is absolutely 100% the reason why I have no hair left, because trying to get programmers, and I say this as a recovering former radio programmer, is trying to get them to come up to agree to an idea that's pitched from a client is nigh on impossible. So the best I can give you is some techniques that I learnt in my time trying to get editorial or content to agree to a client-based idea. The first thing is to accept that there's a 99.99% chance that the idea that the client has come up with isn't going to be as good as something that your editorial or content team have come up with. No matter how great they are, you tend to find that they just don't have the experience to create an absolute cracker. Now, what they will have is potentially the makings of something. They might have look, if the gun to the head, if you put this idea to air exactly the way we want it, we'll give you the money. You want to, again, look into the idea and go, what's the core of it? Yes, it's trying to do a talkback topic on the radio that is about the brand. Well, they've sort of got that bit right, but we would sort of never do that. Then when you want to go to editorial or content to say, listen, this is what we want to do, the worst thing to do is put the gun to the head of the editorial person. You don't want to say you have to say yes to this or we lose the money, because no one wins in that equation. The programmer might say yes, but he'll hate you for life, or he'll say no and he wins and you get nowhere. What you want to remember is, in business, if you're in business, you're selling something to someone every minute of every day. And as a salesperson, you're selling something to editorial. So what do you do when you're selling something to someone? What's in it for them? Why should they say yes to this? What's the psychology of the sale to that person, the internal sale? You've got to find a way to get them involved in not only the decision making, but the creating of the solution. So I always was an advocate of being really authentic. So you go in and say, hey, listen, we've got a really big problem. This client has said to us, you've got to do it this way or you don't get the money. Now, we know we don't operate like that, so I'm not going to put that to you. I'm not going to give you that problem to solve. That's my problem as a salesperson to solve. How I need your help is, how can we turn this really shit idea from them into a good idea that you've come up with? Help me be part of the solution. What would you change about this idea so I can take it back so it's palatable? All of a sudden, and let's be honest, people on editorial and programming sides generally have reasonable egos. You're appealing to the ego. You want them to be able to say they're the solution. They're going to be the savior, and you're asking them for their help. They will give you their help if you ask them for them. And then you want to be authentic in that part, and you want them to go, okay, well, here's what I would do, the solution. So again, as a salesperson, when you're taking that back out to the client or the agency, you're saying, listen, we've run that up the flagpole with editorial. We tried our best. They don't like these bits of it, but we saw the idea behind how you put it together. This is their bits on it. We think it's much better. We're selling that into you. And just, I guess for Jono and others, the key takeout is, just remember, any guns to the head never work. Be the person that says, hey, listen, I really need your help. And be the person that understands you have to look at that editorial person or that programmer or whoever it is that controls content and says, you're good at this. And you're when you're pitching to them, you're saying, I've got to think about what's in it for them. And don't just say revenue, because that doesn't fly.
Awesome, mate. I don't have a single additional thought to add to that. That is a great summation. Other than to say the best opener for this is always, hey, can I pick your brain about a particular issue I'm having?
Absolutely.
As opposed to, hey, we've got revenue on the table. Doesn't really matter oftentimes to anyone in content. It's that whole piece around balance the needs of the audience and the advertiser equally.
Absolutely. And don't go into it like it's a hostage negotiation, because in hostage negotiation, there is a loser. Someone will lose. It'll either be the person with the gun or the hostages, or don't do it that way. Go in with a problem-solving mindset, and just remember, if you're in business, you're selling something to someone. So at that moment, you are selling something to that editorial person. Use the same psychology you use in the market when you're charming and disarming clients.
Yeah, that's such a good insight, and that's one thing I'm just going to call out here, and I'm guilty of it myself, at least early on I was. I love the way that salespeople can be super charming, diplomatic, can really enamor themselves to a client, and then just come into a business and be absolute ratbags, and just the kind of behaviour that you can see. So, hey, look, time to all check ourselves there too, guys. Wade, we got a couple of minutes left. I'd love if you had one parting thought on how to sell an idea, and then I want to hear more about the ideas business, what you guys are doing at the minute, and how the audience can engage with you guys further.
Sure. Well, look, a parting thought is, ideas are subjective, and as I think I mentioned earlier in the episode, is there is beauty in the subjectivity. It's not for everyone. I find that some sellers are really good inventory sellers. They know how to negotiate, crunch a deal, get a good rate. They're not the best sellers of ideas. Let them follow those strengths. Let them follow the way they negotiate and do really well to get revenue in that way. The great creative sellers, the idea sellers, are the ones that are great at selling belief. They're the ones that kind of go, look, I really love this. And, I tend to find that, they're the salespeople that are always hanging around editorial or hanging around the copywriters, or they value ideas from the outset. It means in market, they're going to be really, really good at selling that passion. And you can't really fake that. You can't really be inauthentic about an idea if you're just a really good advertising inventory seller. A solution seller is a problem solver, someone who goes, I see your problem, I see how we can add value by doing it this way. So know which kind of seller you are, know which kind of environment you are and play to your strengths, and embrace the subjectivity of creativity, because that's absolutely where the magic lies. And on the ideas business, we work with lots of different companies, actually, media companies, marketing teams, and our belief is pretty simple. It's that ideas change the world. So our job is to help people create them. We facilitate idea sessions. We do consultations to companies around their idea generation process, how they can make that better. We run workshops, and coming up very soon, we're going to launch a new product called the Creative Coach, which is going to be an e-learning program, which anyone who wants to boost their creative fitness, get better at and more fit at being creative, can learn our 3 core strengths of creativity, which are curiosity, the ability to make connections, and the courage to pitch them and get them up and running. So thecreativecoach.com is where you can go and find out how you can pre-register for our online learning course. The ideasbusiness.com has all of our other services. And you can also get in touch with me on Twitter at Wade Kingsley, or email wade@theideasbusiness.com.
I'm going to put all of those different methods of contact in the show notes, guys. So reach out to Wade. Check out some of the content that's already there. It's good stuff. And if you ever get a chance to see Wade do a keynote, I highly encourage you to do that too. At some point, I think we're going to go back to the new normal where we do get to go see you speak in front of a big crowd, Wade. So we look forward to that. Mate, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today, Wade. It's much appreciated.
Pleasure, Jamie, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. Head to mediasalesmastery.com to help pick the topic, guide the show, and don't forget to subscribe to receive new episodes each week.